from the heart of the city too busy to hate. A progressive voice making too much sense for corporate media's comfort. This is The Ron Show, where we the people come first. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Hello, and thank you for listening. Weekdays, 8 a.m., 4 p.m. on Georgia Now, 11 p.m. Progressive Voice via TuneIn, wherever you podcast. My guest later in the show will be April Ajoy, who Mark Wingfield, in the Baptist News Global piece that he wrote about her, describes her as this. She's an author, content creator, podcast host, known for using humor to push back against the toxic parts of American evangelism. Her new book is Star Spangled Jesus, Leaving Christian Nationalism and Finding a True Faith. Cannot wait to talk with her. She posted on social media, this is what got my attention. She posted on social media just as CPAC was getting warmed up. In fact, she wrote this on Thursday in honor of CPAC happening. Here's a photo of me and my spouse at CPAC 2014. We conducted interviews for a former Fox News personality, and we're thrilled to be there as good old conservatives. Anyway, we're progressive now and cringe when we think about the things we used to believe. Anyone who's listened to this show for any period of time knows that I'm somewhat fascinated by Christian nationalism, American white evangelicism. I grew up in the Southern Baptist Church and have had past guests on. I'm fascinated. I'm just totally fixated watching the ascent of James Talarico in Texas now as the Democratic Party Senate nominee, and just watching with delight as he uses the word of Jesus, the principles of Christianity, actual Christianity, to speak in a political lens to explain how his Christianity has shaped his political and moral ideology. It has them freaked out. Listen to this introduction just from a weekend segment they did on MS Now. I'm not even getting into the entire segment, the Q&A that was held with an author, because that's kind of what I'm about to do with April Ajoy later in the show. But just listen to the lead up. This is Weekend Prime anchor Antonia Hilton, by the way.
I guess there is something about James Talarico, the Texas Democratic nominee for Senate, that is sending Christian nationalists and MAGA allies into a total spiral. Ever since he won the primary, they've been increasingly obsessed with him, rambling about the young pastor and rising Democratic star on their podcasts and on their social media. It seems to be because Talarico does something that very few Democrats do. He speaks openly and unapologetically about how his Christian faith informs his moral and political views on everything from the treatment of immigrants and trans kids to the war with Iran. But some of these extremist pastors seem to think that Jesus belongs to the GOP alone. Last week, a podcaster with ties to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and his Christian nationalist church, Joshua Hames, took attacks on Talarico to a shocking new low in conversation with Hegseth's spiritual advisor.
I pray that God kills him. Ultimately, that means killing his heart and raising him up to new life in Christ. That's the first thing.
We want him crucified with Christ.
That's exactly right.
I want him to be, I think, Saul of Tarsus, Talarico of Tarsus.
Yes,
That's what I want.
Whoa, crucified with Christ. After that clip went viral, Hames responded saying, quote, "Yes, to all those who promote and participate in child sacrifice and the sexual abuse of children, transgender ideology, I pray first for repentance." Even President Trump hasn't been able to help it because he put up a post on Truth Social, a diatribe about Talarico this morning. Quote, "He's got 6 genders, insults to Jesus, only vegan food, was wearing a mask in 2023 and 2024, and is a weak, ineffective guy who we allowed to win prior to releasing the avalanche of information we had on him."
So much of that is funny. First of all, Trump weighing in on what a true Christian is. Hi. The number of genders, what does anyone being a vegan, is Talarico vegan? I didn't know that. What does Talarico being vegan have to do with Christianity exactly? A little concerned about that. And what does Trump mean by, what did he say exactly? Who we allowed to win. I mean, that's not the sort of language you want to use when you already have those on the left who are concerned about you meddling in elections in 2026. Anyway, I'm looking forward to having that conversation with April Ajoy later in the show. I say all this, I lead up to this because, well, obviously that's a constant conversation on this show. When you are a show based in the South and you're discussing politics, it's inescapable the effect of the rise of the religious right, we'll call it, the Southern strategy, the effect of the Southern strategy on politics in the Southern United States, and of course spilling over throughout the entire country at this point in time. It's what's really kind of fascinating in the Trump era to see this marriage where the two don't seem to jibe. There's a lot about the Trump era that doesn't jibe with the GOP when you think about it. Friend of the show, Melita Easter, shared a Facebook post earlier today from a gentleman named Jerry Sims. And in this 2-paragraph post, he sort of summates the curiousness of the Trump era in the GOP. He writes, "The Republican Party is not what it claims to be. The irony is that Republican voters believe that Trump and MAGA represent conservatives. In fact, they're not small government, balanced budget conservatives. We've never had a president who has interfered with business, academics, free speech, the free press, and the lives of the American people as much as Trump. We have never before had a president who was as completely in the pocket of the military-industrial complex and the billionaire class." He continues, "Trump is a warmonger whose profligate spending has set records in deficit spending. But the greater irony is that the Republican Party has never been as successful in job creation and economic prosperity as the Democratic Party. Since 1950, Democratic presidents have presided over the creation of more than twice as many jobs as the Republican Party, even though Republicans and Democratic presidents have been in power the same number of terms." He makes another salient point about Georgia and its era of Democratic Party control versus Republican control since the turn of the century, and how Georgia had ascended in per capita income to 25th at the turn of the century and has slid back to being one of the 10 lowest states in the country when it comes to per capita income. But that's a little off topic. I will, however, because he made it public, I will share it at Ron Show ATL on Facebook if you'd like to read that thing in its entirety. It's very salient. Anyway, it's as I was watching Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock address the No King's Day event in Atlanta, like almost literally tucked into the corner of I-20 and I-75-85, the downtown connector at the Memorial Drive green space there near the state capitol before they marched onto the state capitol. Tons of people there. It's as I was watching and listening to Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock speak that, and by the way, no notes. He brought no note cards. This man just completely spoke off the, imagine that, a minister who can talk at great length without needing notes. That is a man that is driven by his morality, by his ideology, by his spirituality. And you're listening to a podcast, by the way, hosted by a gay atheist. Again, I grew up in the Southern Baptist Church. I am familiar enough with what I was taught to know that philosopher Jesus was a guy I could get down with. It's his white nationalist, Christian nationalist, Southern evangelical block that I don't understand at all. Hang tight, I'm going to give you Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock's comments from No Kings. It's the Ron Show on Georgia Now, Progressive Voices via TuneIn. Tens of thousands of Atlanta area activists showed up for No King's Day events throughout Metro Atlanta, one of the larger, of course, being in downtown near the state capitol, where Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock acknowledged the spiritual work being done at that protest.
You are doing great and grand spiritual work this morning. And I mean that in the largest and grandest sense. God is known by many names, worshipped in many houses. There are those of you who claim no particular faith tradition at all, but you affirm with me that each of us has within us the light, that we have dignity, right? That we have value. And I have to say that as a pastor, part of what pains me in this moment is that too often it is religious voices that are among the meanest voices in our country. And they use religion as yet another tool in the autocratic project, in the project of domination. I have to say as a Christian that I don't know who this Jesus is that they're talking about. I've read the Gospels my whole life. I do not recognize this racist, sexist, homophobic Jesus who hates the poor. The poor man who rose up and said, I came to preach good news to the poor and to open the eyes of the blind and set the captives free is a victim of identity theft. So when you see me stand up, know that I stand under our laws and in my faith. And I refuse to give in. Because this idea of having a human king, of arrogating to a human being the things that do not belong to human beings, that belong to God, is for me a spiritual project when I affirm the dignity of all human beings. That is the work that all of us are called to do. We the people, it's a radical idea. Are you ready to stand up for our democracy? And so all of that came into clear focus for me this week as I was engaged and I remain engaged in a fight. And there are many issues that I could talk about, but two came into sharp focus this week. Can I talk about it for just a moment? On the one hand, we're dealing with Donald Trump's version of ICE. And on the other hand, we're dealing with the so-called SAVE Act. And I want to thank you, Georgia, that because you elected me, I have the high honor of speaking for you. And I want you to know that I've been on the floor of the Senate all week fighting Donald Trump's ICE and fighting the SAVE Act. I went to Minneapolis a few weeks ago. I know I represent the people of Georgia. I'm clear about who I represent. But Dr. King told us that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And so I had to go to Minneapolis. Because what they were practicing there, they intend to export it all over our country. And while I was in Minneapolis, I stood where Renee Good lost her life. I stood where Alex Preddy was executed on film. And because all of these things are ultimately connected, I stood where George Floyd met the same fate. And when I came back from Minneapolis, having stood on what I call holy ground consecrated by the blood of Alex Preddy and the blood of Renee Good and the blood of so many, I came back and I was very clear about one thing. I will not vote to give ICE another single dime until they fix this situation. I will use all of my powers to hold them accountable. And so we got back and we said to our Republican friends, we understand what Homeland Security is about. The Coast Guard is under Homeland Security. FEMA is under Homeland Security. All of these things are under Homeland Security. We're ready to fund what is necessary. But you've already given ICE $75 billion. Let me put that in perspective for you, my beloved. When they gave ICE $75 billion, billion with a B, in the one big ugly bill, they made ICE bigger than the Marines. Think about that. They made ICE bigger than the Marines. They made ICE bigger than all the other federal law enforcement entities combined. ICE is bigger than the FBI, the ATF, the DEA, the U.S. Marshal Services combined. And I'm afraid that a wannabe king who is busy building himself and his billionaires a ballroom intends to use ICE as his own private do his bidding to make him king, but he is not a king. This is our land. This belongs to we the people. And these powers that he arrogates to himself, these buildings that he tries to put his name on, these things no more belong to him than that fake Nobel Peace Prize that he had somebody to give him. And so we said we're not going to fund what you're doing. We need reforms. ICE has to behave like all of our other police departments are demanded to behave. Then they came with the SAVE Act. The SAVE Act is not about saving our democracy, it's about saving their power at all costs. Donald Trump said this is his number one priority. Why is it his number one priority? Because he knows that the American people are sick and tired of him, and we intend to hold his foot soldiers in Congress accountable come November. You are going to hear from the people come November. Are you ready to raise your voices come November? Give me another moment. This is a Baptist 5 minutes. And so I stood up, and we stood up this week, and we said no SAVE Act. This is about voter suppression. You're trying to make it difficult for women to vote, and for poor people to vote, and for young people to vote, and for poor rural people in red districts where they've cut their SNAP and cut their Medicaid. You're trying to make it difficult for the American people to vote, but come November, we are going to hold you accountable. And so that's the work, my beloved, we must do. And as I close, nobody believes a Baptist preacher when he says, as I close. We usually have 4 or 5 closings. I only have one.
All right. Take your time.
But you know, I'm Georgia.
That's right.
I grew up in Savannah. My dad's from Burke County. My mama's from Waycross. I like to talk about Waycross, Georgia. You know where that is. It's way across Georgia. I spent summer days and nights with my grandparents, and I remember being with my grandmother in her garden in Waycross, Georgia one day. We were moving around her garden, and we looked up, and a snake was moving around in the garden. And I was a 7-year-old kid, 6 years old, whatever age I was, and that snake made me nervous. Grew up in the city, wasn't used to seeing that. My grandmother, strong woman that she was, it didn't even faze her. She just took an axe and in no time flat, she said, boop. Chopped the snake's head off. But when she chopped off the head of the snake began to move even more violently. He began to shake. And that made me even more nervous because I felt like he was coming in my direction. What I didn't understand as a little kid was that as I was witnessing the violent, desperate movements of the snake, that snake was moving in the way that it was moving, not because it was living, but because it was dying. That's why they elected Donald Trump in the first place. He represents the violent gesticulations of an old order that is destined to die. The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Evil always goes too far and has within itself the seed of its own destruction. Truth crushed to earth will rise again. It's our job to stand up and be that truth. Are you ready to be truth? Are you ready to be light? Are you ready to stand together? Are you ready to fight together? Are you ready to vote together? Until we win, we the people.
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 So, with no King's events taking place, with the ascent of James Talarico, with Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock speaking on the notes of spirituality within the No Kings movement, also the same weekend, CPAC's taking place. And I don't think that that's coincidence.
This is The Ron Show.
Heard weekdays, 8 a.m., 4 p.m. on Georgia Now, 11 p.m. Progressive Voices via TuneIn. As I mentioned before, my guest this morning is the author of Star Spangled Jesus, Leaving Christian Nationalism and Finding a True Faith. She's a content creator, podcast host as well. April Ajoy joins me this morning. Thank you for getting up early and joining the Ron Show. I appreciate that.
Hi, yeah, I'm excited to be here.
So it was your social media post with CPAC launching last weekend that caught my attention. You met your spouse at CPAC. You guys were CPACers. You guys were all up in it and interviewing on behalf of Fox News personalities, et cetera. So, give me a little bit of your background, just in a quick little 90-second summation, if you can, to let everybody know just how involved in the conservative movement you were.
Yeah, so I grew up. My dad was a preacher, a traveling preacher. So we had very much conflated our Christianity with our political beliefs. High school, I went on a America Say Jesus caravan where we had America Say Jesus written all over a 40-foot bus based on my dad's book, where we had an open letter to George Bush to start saying the name of Jesus so that, we could make America a Christian nation again, because we believed liberals and ACLU, feminists, your usual buzzwords, they were destroying the country. I also wrote a song called America Say Jesus that I sang on the Jim Baker show. And I met my spouse actually at Pat Robertson's university, and we were going there at the time when we went to CPAC to shoot these. It was so long ago, but we were shooting these interviews for a former Fox News personality, and we were just good little conservative Christian darlings that felt like we were literally on God's side.
I was reading your background, and just so you know, a lot of my audience might. I used to be married into a Pentecostal family myself, but here's a little bit of corollary. You remind me a little bit of my ex-sister-in-law in that I was married into a Pentecostal minister's family, but I was actually married to a man. And so that rocked the stage a little bit on their part.
I'm sure they loved that.
Yeah. Oh, listen, the mother-in-law who she and I we adore each other still to this day. She first Facebook message to me was, I may come near my grandkids and I may have to shoot you. So yeah, it was.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There was plenty to unpack there. But that's why when I was reading your background, I'm like, wow, I feel like we can probably talk on a lot of commonalities there. But I also grew up in the Southern Baptist Church as a kid. My parents weren't particularly religious, but my best friend and his parents were. Dad was a deacon, mom played the piano, and so we had to go to church when I'd stay over at Jeremy's house. So I came up in that faith as well, and I don't know why it was that sort of indoctrination really didn't take with me as much. But I can certainly understand it. I feel like I was almost like a sleeper cell spy embedded in the church, and I came away learning a lot about it, but it didn't affect me in the negative way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I think everyone's experience is different. But yeah, it's wild I feel like I'm so progressive now that it's still feels like a different life when I think about, how conservative I used to be.
But do you think that some of the things that you were taught, the morality taught in the church, actually shaped your progressive values in a way that I think the evangelical Christian nationalist GOP aligned movement didn't expect?
I do think that, because when I first started kind of, whatever the word you want to use, deconstruction, when I first started questioning things, it was because of my faith. It was because I, prided myself in being a Christ follower and trying to be a good person and as Christ-like as possible. And I came to the Trump was a huge wake-up call. There were obviously little things along the way that I was starting to question, but when Trump came on the scene as the Republican nominee, I could not fathom how the faith that I had been brought up in that values morality and not cheating on your wife all the time, because I remember the big fuss they made about Bill Clinton back in the day. I could not fathom how we could just unilaterally as evangelicals support Donald Trump, and not just support him, but champion him as this Christian hero. And every time I would go back and read the Gospels and the teachings of Jesus, I was like, no, like this man is the antithesis of everything that Jesus stood for. So it was my faith and what had been instilled in me, which is that we love our neighbors, no matter who they are. And then it was a very, it was a little bit of an existential crisis to realize how many people didn't actually mean what they were saying.
Yeah, and again, having come up in that environment myself and raised in the suburban South, I just I'm sure you can relate to this too. Just became alarmed at how many people really had some real hostile views that were the antithesis of what you thought Christianity was supposed to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, Trump in a way was kind of my wake up call to the marriage of American evangelicalism and republicanism. I mean, it's always been there, but I thought we were Republicans because that was the Christian stance. And then the more I pulled that string, I realized, oh no, we are American evangelicals because that is what is giving Republicans power. It was like this flip of a way of perceiving what was actually happening.
Yeah, that's a fascinating way of putting that too. It did feel as if at some point in time it became pretty clear to me as a young adult that the church became a tool for the political organization versus the political organization being a tool for the church. And I think that there is a little bit of two-way traffic there, but I think it's overwhelmingly political organization using the church as the tool more often than the other way around.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And I think you have a lot of pastors that also use their politics to push their theological positions, but like very narrow theological positions. I mean, it's actually really scary today how close, Doug Wilson, who is a Christian nationalist pastor, and he's not really mainstream, but he's becoming more mainstream because he's Pete Hegseth's pastor.
Yeah.
And his church, doesn't believe in a woman's right to vote and wants to repeal the 19th Amendment.
And the thing that gets me is like, we don't use the term radical religion when it comes to that sort of mindset, or radical religious pastor, or radical right-wing religious. Maybe it's just too much to say. I don't know, but the word leftist gets lobbed about so much that it's almost like in the 90s. Well, you remember this when you were railing on Clinton, for example. The word liberal was a dirty word. Leftist is leftist is the new liberal, or even progressive, I guess, in some form. But there doesn't seem to be a label that sticks to that radicalization on the right.
Yeah, I think they've done a frustratingly great job at marketing because really you have a good chunk of white American evangelicals are Christian nationalists, but they would never say that they are. They think they're just being good Christians. And so you have Christian nationalism and this like really right-wing political identity that has co-opted American Christianity so that people that are in it haven't realized how political their faith is. And you'll have people like, I don't know, Allie Beth Stuckey. She's a big Christian nationalist commentator. She would tell you she is not a Christian nationalist. She wrote that book, Toxic Empathy, because they're demonizing empathy now.
Empathy,
but
right?
I know, of all the things. But people like her would say, well, I'm just being a good Christian. And if you call her a Christian nationalist, they turn it into a persecution. They play the persecution card and say, oh, you're just attacking me because I'm standing up for biblical truth. You're attacking me because I'm standing up for God. And so they have made it to where it becomes really difficult for people that don't come from that world to call it out, because no one wants to seem like they're attacking Christianity, because if you do that, it's a huge story. People freak out, people do boycotts. There's all these things. So it's really, that is why it can be so hard to stop and to even spot, because it is really kind of embedded itself in just American Christianity in general.
And yet, as I mentioned earlier, you remind me a little bit of my ex-sister-in-law, because she was kind of in the same predicament in some form. Like, she's very much a left-wing voter in Northwest Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene country, right? The daughter of a minister. the daughter of a minister who also had a gay sibling. And she picks up on it pretty quickly. She's not like some Ivy League scholar or anything like that. I know she went to Georgia Highlands and, got a degree and, worked in construction for a long time. She's just a good girl. She's a good, rural Georgia lady who raised her kids, and her kids, aren't the judgmental type or anything like that. You remind me in some ways of her in that realm. And I don't know necessarily where I was going with that, but she was able to pick up on it despite, again, being embedded in the Pentecostal church in rural Northwest Georgia, and her mother is a diehard Trumper.
Yeah, I do think once you see one problem in the ideology, everything else crumbles. But it can be really hard to see that first problem because there are so many defense mechanisms built in to the indoctrination. Like one being, you're supposed to question everybody from the outside, and they're all, you're either of God or you're of Satan. I mean, even your own thoughts. So you question, you're not allowed to really have questions because it's just the idea of thinking on your own. Even critical thinking was demonized. I remember being taught that Satan can use critical thinking.
Wow. Wow. Which, again, I go back to thinking of my ex-in-laws. I think my former father-in-law, the minister, I think he actually sort of, he'd never come out and say it, but I think he's sort of repulsed by the antics and actions of Trump, and is a little ashamed of, seeing how the flock have sort of adorned Trump with all of this fetting, and you see the stock photos of the minister all laying hands on him and praying like it's actually I mean, is that not just the most repulsive thing? But I also think like in my former mother-in-law's case, like there's a little bit of pride too. There's just no coming to terms with having been conned by someone, or having lived as long as she's lived, and coming to some grips with, oh my God, I have been led astray all this time. It's a very hard pill to swallow.
Yeah, because not only do you have to swallow the pill that you were wrong, but also so many of the policies that you've supported and voted for and advocated for harmed so many people. And especially if you were raised in Christianity, you were told from the pulpit week after week that you are the good guy. We're the good guys. We're the ones that are standing up for the poor and the marginalized. And even though from an objective standpoint, that's not what you're doing with how you're voting, you've convinced yourself that is what you're doing. And so when you start questioning, not only are you questioning being wrong, but then you're questioning, oh shoot, was I actually the villain in this story? And that can just be too hard a pill to swallow for a lot of people.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We are with author, content creator, influencer, April Ajoy. Her book, Star Spangled Jesus, Leaving Christian Nationalism and Finding a True Faith, is out. I want to ask you a few questions about your experience at CPAC versus now what we see at CPAC and the conservative movement. We'll continue that conversation when the Ron Show returns. Back with author April Ajoy, the book Star Spangled Jesus, Leaving Christian Nationalism and Finding a True Faith. I think it would be interesting to point out, by the way, I didn't necessarily leave a faith, but you actually still are very much tied to your faith, just in a very progressive way.
The more I started questioning, I realized a lot of my conservative beliefs at the time were incompatible with the teachings of Jesus. And then I just kept pulling that string and got more and more progressive. And then eventually I just realized, especially on the queer affirming stuff, because I feel like when I was conservative, abortion and gay marriage were like the two biggies that you could not ever falter on, because those were like the worst things you could ever do. I had a brother who came out to me, and I realized that I wanted to be wrong on that front, but I couldn't reconcile certain scriptures. But the more that I pulled the string, I realized, there's actually a queer affirming interpretation of this scripture. And I searched on that. I was never told that prior.
Nope.
And then just the more I realized that the Bible is inconsistent in a lot of ways. There's not one biblical worldview. And I think it's more of the story of God as opposed to the word of God, because even the Bible itself says the word of God is Jesus, not itself. I just realized I am going to err on the side of love. And I just don't think God, whatever happens when I die, I don't think that being would have an issue with that. And if they did have an issue, then I would have an issue, and I wouldn't want to be up there. So
yeah, no, that's sort of the reconciliation that I came up with as well. If I'm at the pearly gates and I'm being judged because I didn't believe, I just don't think, like, if I live my life right and do unto others, the golden rule, I just don't think that God's going to look at me and go, nope, got to send you to the fiery pits.
Right. And the idea that I believe, you believe God loves everybody unconditionally, but would send you to hell forever if you just don't believe the exact right things.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense. That doesn't go together.
But
at all.
It's sort of egomaniacal to think that God would think like that. But that's kind of the sort of thing that we actually see from Donald Trump. You're either loyal to him 1,000% or you're cast into the fiery pits of Marjorie Taylor Greenland.
Yeah, and I actually think that is one reason why so many evangelicals were able to make that pivot to support Donald Trump, because he kind of embodies the authoritarianism that they view God in.
Now, you were attending CPAC in 2014, or were you? And I guess he was your boyfriend at the time, right? Not your spouse.
Yeah.
Having attended Liberty University, and take us in that quick frame from 2014, attending CPAC to when it all started becoming questionable in your mind. You mentioned the ascendancy of Trump started really bringing the questions up. Did your brother come out before that, or after that, or somewhere in the middle, or?
Yeah. So my brother came out in 2015 to me. He came to visit us when we were in Virginia. He lived in Texas at the time. That's where I'm originally from. And he was just bawling when he came out to me in 2015. And so I knew, I had been taught that if you're gay, it's because you're either oppressed by a demon or possessed by a demon, because in Pentecostal world, there's a difference.
Yeah.
But a demon was definitely involved. And I just, as a Pentecostal, we were taught that as long as you had enough faith, whatever you asked God for, he would give it to you. And so we believed that gay people just needed to ask Jesus to make them straight, and that would happen.
Oh, that we tried. Trust me, we tried.
I know. And so my brother, he was 26 when he came out to me, and I was the first person he told.
Wow.
And he said he had known since middle school and had begged God
Wow.
countless times, crying herself to sleep to make him straight, and didn't understand why God wouldn't, felt like God didn't love him, felt like just so isolated. And I mean, we were in a very homophobic environment too. I mean, that was like the worst thing you could do is be gay. And I, immediately knew, okay, well, I don't know what my theology is around this, but I know what I believed up until this moment is wrong.
Yeah.
And it took me a little longer to become queer affirming. Like, I took a few years to really study the scripture and figure it out. But at that point, I did lay down my political weapons.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, on that front. So as far as CPAC, we were I campaigned for Mitt Romney prior to that. Unofficially, he didn't ask me to, but I was just that passionate. I just made Romney video, try to get everyone to vote for Romney. So 2014, that was before Trump came on the scene when we were at CPAC. And honestly, I don't really remember it. There was nothing super eventful that happened. I remember we saw Newt Gingrich. He was like one of the big names at the time in the conservative world, but it was just, it wasn't this cult feeling that you feel now.
Yeah.
I do think one of the biggest differences is that it was more of a community team back in 2014. Like, we're all on the same team. We're working together, where now it's just, we're going to do what Trump tells us to do.
Yeah.
And it's super weird. It's like the biggest alpha males are all about submission to Donald Trump.
Right. Yeah. Fealty. Right. No, 1,000%. Well, and that's the thing that sort of troubles me too. I talk at great length on this show about the ex-MAGA or the ex-GOP, the folks that left GOP, and instead, or like in our case here in Georgia, we have a former lieutenant governor who was a Republican. He's now a Democrat running for governor. And at the time, I thought to myself, I would rather you stay in your party and try to reclaim it. I think the country would be better served by that. If we could disagree ideologically on conservative v. progressive, but at least reclaim your party from this cult that has overtaken it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I know for me, once I saw Trump, become the champion, I especially like Franklin Graham, because as a Christian nationalist, I did not know I was a Christian nationalist. I thought I was just being a good Christian. I realized in hindsight, that's what I was. Yeah. But when you're in that world, it only takes one question. So I looked at like the Franklin Grahams of the world, who I had really respected. And he came out pretty strong for Trump early on. And I remember being so confused by that, because I felt so strongly in my spirit that I could not vote for Donald Trump, no matter what. Like, I was a never Trumper from the beginning. I was like, if he gets the nominee, I will not vote for him. Of course, I only voted third party at the time because I still couldn't bring myself to vote for a demon rat because I was very indoctrinated that Democrats didn't like Christians, which is not true because here I am, a Christian and a Democrat. But yeah, so Franklin Graham, I looked at him and other Christian leaders that were getting behind Donald Trump, and I knew that they were wrong about Trump. Like, I had no doubts about it. And so I just asked myself, okay, if they are wrong about Donald Trump, but are saying it so confidently, what else have they taught me that is also wrong that I've believed?
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the path that I went down to realize, so then I realized so many other things were wrong about the Christian conservative belief system. So I could not stay a Republican anymore because I switched on a lot of issues.
So being from Texas yourself, your thoughts on James Talarico, and I think he's sort of tapped into what I think a lot of folks who think like you could find themselves evolving towards, even if they might be in the MAGA movement now.
Yeah, I think what James Talarico is doing is great. I've been saying for a long time that I feel like the best way to combat Christian nationalism is just to use scripture against them. I mean, because really there's so much in the Bible, especially like teachings of Jesus, that is a kryptonite to Christian nationalist beliefs. And I know why a lot of, Democratic politicians don't want to do that because, that side believes in the separation of church and state, which I also do. And you don't want to seem like the Republican nationalist by doing that. So I get that. But I also think at this point, we need to fight fire with fire because really there's nothing facts don't work on that group of people. You can't use logic or reason, but you can use the Bible. And I do think there are a lot of people that, like, if you hear the teaching of Jesus that is going directly against what you're pushing politically, like take the mass deportation of immigrants for the record, and Jesus said, I was a stranger and you did not welcome me, and what you do to the least of these, you did to me. You can try to justify how it was a different time and he wasn't meaning America and blah, 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 blah. But at a certain point, that's going to fall flat because that actually doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So I think what James Talarico is great. I don't think he's going to persuade the hardcore MAGA people, but there are a lot more people than I think most realize that are kind of more in the middle, that might even be a little more conservative politically because that's what they've been taught to be, but genuinely are good people, want to follow the teachings of Jesus, don't want to harm people. And he's giving them an option. Like, there is a way you can be a Christian and be a Democrat, because when you come from that world, you are taught that Christians cannot vote Democrat. Like, you could basically almost lose your salvation if you vote for a Democrat.
Right.
And so I think the way that he's talking to those people is really just giving them another option. Like, you don't have to support the most antichrist person that's ever been in the White House, Donald Trump. There's an alternative.
Who had the audacity to speak about James Talarico's Christianity? I just thought that was stunning. Like,
oh my gosh, I know.
Of all the people to speak on that, it's certainly not him. April Ajoy, author of the book Star Spangled Jesus, Leaving Christian Nationalism and Finding a True Faith. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. I appreciate having this conversation with us, and look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
From the heart of the city too busy to hate, a progressive voice making too much sense for corporate media's comfort. This is The Ron Show, where we the people come first. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Hi, and thank you for listening. Weekdays, 8 a.m., 4 p.m. on Georgia Now. The 4 p.m. broadcast is the rerun now. And 11 p.m. Progressive Voices via TuneIn, wherever you podcast. As we headed into the weekend, one of the big storylines coming out of Georgia politics was the endorsements, I should say, of two prominent Georgia Democratic senior statesmen, former Governor Roy Barnes, former Atlanta Mayor and UN Ambassador Andrew Young, having endorsed former DeKalb County CEO Michael Thurmond. Greg Bluestein at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution giving us that story last Friday that the two of Georgia's most prominent Democratic endorsements came late last week. Bluestein writing that the duo nods give Thurmond a boost as he tries to break through a crowded primary field led by former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, frontrunner in the May 19th Democratic primary. There's been a lot of crowing on social media about these endorsements as well. I don't happen to think that they really carry that much clout, if I'm being honest. I mean, it's been a long time since Roy Barnes was governor. It's been a long, long time since Andrew Young was mayor of Atlanta. Back then, the Braves were on the Superstation, America's team. Ted Turner owned. I mean, it's been a long time since Andrew Young was mayor. That said, for some reason, those two endorsements got a lot of publicity, a lot of media. But when you go to, well, let's go to the front runners. The front runners on the campaign here. I got to tell you something that's kind of funny. I pulled up Jeff Duncan's endorsements, Keisha Lance Bottoms' endorsements page, Jason Estevez endorsements page. And when you, I'm going to have to do screen grabs in case this changes. When it comes to Keisha Lance Bottoms' endorsements, you have the headline, "We are strongly supporting your name for political office. Dozens of local organizations and leaders are standing together." And then you have, I'm guessing these are stock photos of people. We've got a young African-American woman, young Asian woman, middle-aged man, and underneath all of these names are endorser name, endorser title, endorser logo, endorser logo, endorser. This is, it's not done. This page has not been done yet. I'm not saying that Keisha Lance Bottoms doesn't have endorsements. I'm saying that when I go to Keisha Lance Bottoms' gubernatorial page, her endorsements aren't there. Jeff Duncan famously has picked up endorsements from some organizations like the Southern Regional Council of Carpenters, the Georgia Men for Democracy Now! PAC. It's an African-American-led organization. Reverend James Major Woodall Sr. shows up as a former NAACP president. Lanny Wong, she is the NACA Atlanta chair. Okay, 4 endorsements. When I go to Jason Estevez, it's a long list. He mentions featured endorsements, including Jason Carter, former state senator and gubernatorial candidate himself, former U.S. Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates, Shanette Williams would be the mother of Amber Nicole Thurman, and then, I mean, nearly 24 state legislators. He's got the Democratic representation under the Gold Dome under wraps. In fact, I was at his kickoff event in Atlanta, and it was Senate Minority Leader Harold Jones from Augusta and Senator Kim Jackson who told the story that the two of them got together and were trying to figure out, like, so who's going to run for governor? Should we get behind somebody? Who? And they both agreed it should be Jason Estevez. Now, I mean, listen, endorsements aren't nothing. And I'm not going to sit here and dismiss the endorsements of former Governor Roy Barnes or Andrew Young or any of the state legislators or Jeff Duncan's endorsements. If Keisha has endorsements, she needs to update her website. We're less than 2 months out, and the person who, again, it's minimal polling, the person who leads in polling has a website with an endorsement page that has stock photos and the names, endorser name, endorser title under those stock photos. Even the organization logos are just stock logos. Oh, Ron, you're nitpicking. No, I mean, this is leadership matters, right? Somebody gave me some flack. In fact, I think Michael Thurman was a little quizzical when I asked him about his lack of social media presence until he decided to run for governor. Maybe I was nitpicking a little bit. All I know is whoever Georgia's next governor is going to be, and we've seen across the aisle, the creepy billionaire comic book villain and the affable, clumsy daddy's boy who enriched himself while in office. I just know that when I go to, how are we going to vote? Is it going to be hand-marked paper ballot? No, it's not going to, by November, maybe. That's another story we'll get to later. All I know is when I go to vote for who I want to be representing my party atop the ticket, I need to know that the individual chosen is going to make the correct call when it comes to adding to his or her staff, and will be the one with the least amount of baggage, the one that can rally the entire party behind them. So to me, if endorsements are going to matter, I think it matters a lot that the elected representation in the Georgia General Assembly, by an overwhelming margin, supports Jason Estevez. But that's just my 2 cents. There's a great piece that I shared at Ron Show ATL on Facebook from WSB Television. here in Atlanta, and this, listen, I know you think, oh, it's an Atlanta story. It kind of is, but it kind of isn't, because I think this story can apply to just about any city of any substantive size in the United States. Did I say that right? Substantial size in the United States. There are local and state, and in some cases still federal ordinances that the efforts of civil rights legislation, dare I say diversity, equity, and inclusion, that have tried to undo, again, local ordinances, state ordinances, federal ordinances that have existed the 1930s, Jim Crow era, further back, Civil War, the dawn of American time, right? There is just about in every city the correct side of the tracks and the wrong side of the tracks. You know what I mean? So while this is an Atlanta story, it sort of carries just about anywhere you live. I mean, I've lived all over the South in my life as a radio DJ, right? And station management. Grew up in Augusta, lived in Athens, Greenville, South Carolina, back to Augusta, Mobile, Alabama, New Orleans, Alexandria, Louisiana, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and back here to Atlanta. There's a right side, wrong side of the tracks just about everywhere you live. There's a black part of town, the rest of the town. It's so universal. So the headline, again, I shared it at Ron Show ATL on Facebook. It'll be in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. Moral crossroads. Atlanta data reveals disparity between North and South. Anybody who has spent any time in Atlanta knows there's the north side of I-20, and then there's the south side of I-20. And the disparities are greater than even I knew. Working in residential real estate, I can tell you, when I have somebody who is prospecting to buy a house south of I-20, if it's not like immediate, like just south of I-20, like East Atlanta Village, Grant Park, you start to see a difference in pricing and a difference in incomes, mortgage applications coming through. So this piece really spoke to me and pointed out a lot of data that I kind of knew about, but didn't know it was as severe as it was. Let me read to you a little bit. New data released by the City of Atlanta and nonprofit partners highlights deep disparities in health, income, and opportunity across neighborhoods. Mayor Andre Dickens described the findings as a, quote, tale of two cities, while launching a neighborhood reinvestment initiative to address long-standing inequities. That, by the way, is the sort of talk that made President Barack Obama, in the eyes of MAGA, the most divisive president. Isn't that what Trump said here recently? The most divisive president ever. No, just revealing the disparities that exist and speaking to them from the opposite side of the fence makes a politician seem divisive. The data traces many of the current inequities back to redlining policies from the 1930s, which continue to shape outcomes across a diagonal divide in the city. And it's a very real divide, folks. To address these gaps, Mayor Dickens proposed extending tax allocation districts, a move he says could generate more than $5 billion for citywide improvements. Economic stability shows a sharp divide between the North and South. In North Atlanta, the median household income is approximately $125,000, while Southern neighborhoods range from $15,000 to $32,000. That's anywhere from like a tenth to a quarter of the income of North Atlantans. Small business revenue also differs significantly, averaging $50 million in the North compared to less than $1 million in the South. Poverty rates and education levels further illustrates the gap. About 2% of children in North Atlanta live in poverty compared to between 73 and 91% in the South and West. The piece continues. High school completion rates are about 99% in the North, but range from 65 to 78% in Southern neighborhoods. Dickens spoke of the urgency of addressing these figures during the announcement. He said, "We're at a moral crossroads. We're the economic capital of the South, but inequality is still a prevailing force in Atlanta. Too many neighborhoods have been left behind in our city's success." It's important, I think, that he's pointing this out without necessarily pointing to the racial disparities, but they're very real. I'm also reminded, by the way, that there have been, several attempts, and some successful, to see the northern portion of Greater Atlanta secede from the city of Atlanta. Sandy Springs exists because they didn't want to become Atlanta. Didn't even like the mailing address, which they couldn't get rid of necessarily in some cases, but still. The Buckhead City movement. You don't think that had anything to do with these disparities? They don't want their taxation to fund the uplifting of the southern part of the city. And they felt as if the ramifications of these disparities, which, of course, comes in waves of crime and or lack of opportunity becoming crime, et cetera, and so on. They didn't like the stigma that came with having the Atlanta residential address while also seeing those disparities bring about those issues. The article continues, healthcare access and housing costs vary by location. Less than 5% of residents in North Atlanta are uninsured, while 34 to 39% of those in the South lack coverage. Additionally, about 6% of northern residents are rent burdened, compared to between 65 and 77% in southern areas. Diabetes rates are about 3% in the north, but reach 22 to 24% in the south. Infrastructure access follows similar patterns. Broadband access is about 95% in the north, but drops to between 33 and 48% in the south, though the Cascade area has 58% access. Commute times, oh God, they average 20 minutes in the north, but can reach 45 minutes in southern neighborhoods. I mean, you can look at a MARTA map, for example, and see how much more served the north is versus the south. You don't think that's by design as well? But again, this is not just an Atlanta story, okay? I caution you against just dismissing this as, oh, he's just going off on an Atlanta story. This is an American story. This happens throughout the country in cities of various size. I go back to my hometown of Augusta. South Augusta lags West Augusta. Downtown Augusta lags West Augusta. West Augusta is the more affluent part of the city. And there were, by the way, efforts to secede from the city. Instead, what happened in the late 80s, early 90s, I can't remember when it was, the city of Augusta and Richmond County merged, and there was a lot of backlash, again, from the more affluent neighborhoods that did not want to merge into one large city. Back to the WSB piece. The Atlanta Women's Foundation is one of the nonprofit partners working on the initiative. The foundation provides grants to organizations in Fulton, DeKalb, Clayton, Gwinnett, and Cobb counties to expand service access. Channel 2's Erin Rogers spoke to Atlanta Women Foundation CEO Carrie Love. She says focusing on mental health and stability, that's a priority. She said once their mind is healthier, they're more stable, then everything else sort of falls into place. They can secure a job. Once they've secured a job, then we're not as stressed out about, the food on the plate or the decision we have to make about, will we be late on rent? Research from the foundation identified Clayton County as having some of the highest disparities in housing costs and healthcare access. Organizations like the Center for Black Women's Wellness provide mental and physical health services to close these gaps. Center CEO Jamea Dorsey for Black Women's Wellness said the organization aims to provide a safe space for residents, regardless of income, regardless of insurance status, that we can be that safe space to make sure you're taken care of, she said. Elbany Maxwell, a client and business owner, used these services following a personal tragedy. Maxwell said the support helped her through her darkest moment after she lost her son in 2024. She said, I'm showing up as a business owner. I'm showing up as a caregiver, as a mom, as a wife. City leaders say closing the gap will require sustained investment from both the public and private sectors. Mayor Dickens has suggested extending the tax allocation districts to generate the projected $5 billion for citywide services. Improvements, I should say. I will include this in the show notes at ronjoydetail.com. But I want to go back to, again, pointing out, framing this as not an Atlanta story. This is an American story that we can see all over the United States. Not just in, like I said, cities of any substantial size, which is true, but also states. Mississippi is one of the most impoverished states in the country. Louisiana not far behind. Both of those states have prodigious minority populations. A lot of them, by the way, voter disenfranchised. And sometimes it's all about where you live. When you hear about education funding equity, there's a reason these disparities exist. And I hear from conservatives, these budgets are so much higher in these minority communities in larger cities. Well, real estate costs more. Security costs a lot. And these are issues that have to do with decades of systemic, often codified norms, guidelines, laws, policies that we've only begun chipping away at in the last 50 years. And in some cases, we're seeing a return in this anti-DEI swing that has happened since 2024. Well, politically anyway. I think the anti-DEI swing began long before that. But that's what's so frustrating about this current administration. Like all of the effort, all of the work that's been done in the last 50 years, just to make incremental changes to the positive, are being undone so fast. And there just is not an appetite in this country, period, outside of activism within these marginalized communities, in these marginalized areas of cities and states, to address that. We have, I think, a lack of political courage within the Democratic Party. I have these debates all the time with folks who want to pursue reparations. Not that I disagree with the concept. Like, we're long overdue for that. There's just a political reality that if a politician were to speak on that, it's electoral suicide, which sucks. We should be having a conversation about addressing these systemic inequalities, these inequities that exist. You would hope, being this free market capitalistic society, see the business community step up and go, wow, if we could address these inequities, these inequalities, man, this economy would take off. I would love to hear that from the free market capitalism portion of this country that tends to vote right. Because that's a fact. You want to get rid of crime? I do too. The best way to deal with it is to better the opportunities that exist where crime is more rampant. And you can't do that if you don't start addressing the inequities, the inequalities. Locking people up isn't going to undo the inequities. In fact, when those folks come out, they're even more burdened. It's hard to get a job when you've got a rap sheet. When you've got a rap sheet and you're from that part of town, or a rap sheet and you're from that part of town and you didn't finish high school, and you don't have the home equity, if you even own a home, because again, it was harder to buy a home, the south part of Atlanta, right? You don't have anything to invest in yourself, to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, to go to college, to send your kid to college. These inequities just don't go away on their own. And we've tried, again, chipped away, literally just kink, 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 just chipping away at those sort of inequities for the last 50 years. And we're seeing now that all of the progress made has been undone in the matter of a year and a half. I say almost have been undone in the last year and a half. And the prevailing mindset on the right is that any effort to combat inequality is akin to DEI and punishing whites and white males, making it the concept that we're taking the finite amount of pie and disproportionately giving it to the marginalized subset, versus the idea that, well, it's not just that we're dividing up the one pie. We'd like to make more pie. Can we not just make more pie instead? Now, the WSBP spoke more to like tax allocation districts and yada, yada, yada. I happen to disagree with the mayor where he, wants to put an emphasis on Beltline rail more towards the south end than where it's needed right now. The Beltline is supposed to encircle the entire city with rail, and that's another conversation for another segment, which we've done before. But there's something to learn from just this piece about this city that you can apply to just about any city, and in some cases, entire states, and start having a conversation about when are we as a country going to grow up and realize we have made a lot of mistakes. We have built a house on faulty foundation, right? This is a realtor talk again. And if you don't fix the foundation, the house is going to crumble. You can't ignore the foundation issues because the house is going to crumble. We have to start addressing those foundation issues. And that means investment. Ask a homeowner who's had to deal with foundation problems. It means an investment.
Broadcasting 5 days a week to make common sense common again. This is The Ron Show.
There was a Macon No Kings event that occurred over the weekend. I mean, there were No Kings events all over the state, all over the country, obviously. This one was dispersed, and not by law enforcement, but by the presence of someone from law enforcement. And I'm a little uncomfortable with us just, shutting down completely and not wanting to have conversations, to reach across the aisle, to listen, to hear people out. I also am not comfortable with any movement that wants to appear to be anti-law enforcement. This takes us back to defund the police, which was a misnomer and needed tinkering with. I'm going to read to you a piece from Alondra Roca in the Georgia Recorder. I'll include it in the show notes at RonShowATL.com. Macon No Kings event ends abruptly when sheriff tries to address concerns about cooperation with ICE. Hundreds of people gathered Saturday in Macon, about 80 miles south of Atlanta, for another round of No Kings demonstrations. But the event abruptly ended when the local sheriff was invited up to address concerns about his agency's cooperation with federal immigration officers. She Keene, an organizer with the advocacy organization Macon Rising, told the crowd as she introduced Bibb County Sheriff David Davis that organizers had met with Davis and had a civil and good dialogue about things they both agreed and disagreed on. Keene asked him if he would participate in community outreach, saying he is here today. But protesters kept yelling, saying that nobody wants to hear from him, before chanting, "This is what democracy looks like." Davis, who opted to address a few people instead as the crowd dispersed, said that the sheriff's office, which has had a 287G program agreement with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement since February 2025, is only following the law by holding immigrants living in the U.S. without authorization for 48 hours to allow ICE to take them into custody. Davis said he doesn't have control over ICE. He said, ICE is a federal agency, and we really don't have much jurisdiction over what federal agency does. But if they come here and mistreat our citizens and mistreat our law enforcement folks, we're going to be a documenter of facts, and we're going to make sure that they treat our citizens in a legal manner. In a statement sent after the demonstration, Keene said that Macon Rising, which faced criticism for inviting him to speak, is focused on bringing people together, quote, around shared values of democracy, safety, and transparency, but that they respect other organizations' approaches. The statement continues, our decision to invite him to speak at the rally is rooted in that commitment to public accountability and direct communication. We believe our community deserves the opportunity to hear from and engage with those in positions of authority, especially on issues that impact their safety and rights. Before the demonstration's abrupt ending, an estimated 500 to 600 people from the Macon area gathered at Rosa Parks Square to protest Trump administration policies that protesters and speakers say are a threat to democracy. He is single-handedly destroying the global order that kept us prosperous and at peace since World War II, said Lizella resident Jack Mahaney, an engineering professor at Mercer University. Kim Martin from Macon and her stepson, Landon Martin, said they attended the demonstration because they hadn't seen the change they hoped to see from the first two protests. We talked about that last week on this show. Kim said that she hopes, quote, an actual goal comes out of the demonstration today and, quote, showing up is not enough. We haven't seen the change that we desire since we protested the first time. And this is just one of the many actions I feel like we're taking to try to bring about change, Kim said. To which I would ask, as I did last week, all right, what are you doing today? Kim, stepson Landon, what are you doing today? What are you doing later this week? I get it. It's a Monday. Kids got to go to school. People got to work. But what are you doing in continuance of your showing up to No Kings on Saturday? That's the question we all have to be asking ourselves afterwards. My friend Mike, who made the effort to come from, well, he lives on La Vista Road, so not that big of an effort, but he made an effort to come from Northeast Atlanta into the heart of the city to attend No Kings Day in Atlanta. Mike, what are you doing the rest of this week? And I'm not going to sit here and dismiss like social media advocacy. Sharing information on your social media feeds is important. Sharing the Instagram story, like that's all very important. But beyond that, what are we doing? Because we can't just show up when it's polite and we've gotten all the right documentations and permits to protest. We have to continue by looking towards what the next event is. A lot of folks are pointing towards May 1st as like the May Day No spend, skip work day. But you know what? That's a Friday. It's just kind of easy to say, I'm just not going to do it today. I'll do it tomorrow. Maybe it's about us making some sacrifices and saying what we can do without, what we can live without. A lot of us, stop going to Target. I used to love shopping at Target. I can get that stuff elsewhere. Back to Alondra Roca's piece. State Senator Josh McLaren from Sandy Springs, a Democratic candidate for lieutenant governor, said that public demonstrations and pushback are what are keeping the country from falling into fascism. I hope he's right. I hope that the White House is paying attention. I think Republicans are paying attention. That's why do you think so many of them are just retiring instead of running for re-election? It's a headache that they don't want to deal with. They'll leave it to somebody else. I think that is the sort of effect that we do see from these rallies, these events. That in spite of the attempt to gerrymander their way out of losing the House, that if anything, you would think that the Speaker of the House himself would be somehow swayed, but he's so beholden to the president, who we don't see reacting favorably to these events. In fact, all we see is a doubling down on efforts. He tried the gerrymandering thing, and Democrats called his bluff. So now he's moved on to the SAVE Act. And again, Democrats are calling his bluff. 9 times Democrats offered funding for TSA to end the government shutdown. 9 times. Republicans didn't take the bait because the president wants the SAVE Act. He is singularly the one individual not paying attention to the No King's Day events, and they're aimed at him. So I guess we just have to keep working on everybody else. But McLaren's right. These demonstrations and pushback are what are keeping the country from falling into fascism, and encourage the audience, this piece writes, to push back against policies from the current administration. He said it was public opinion that made the would-be tyrant start to reconsider the completely senseless tariff policies. But let me get back to what the piece introduced us to, which was the invitation of a local law enforcement official to speak to the crowd in answer to, because I honestly, I feel like law enforcement is stuck between a rock and a hard place here. Most law enforcement personnel who are not, just themselves white nationalists, embedded racists, Proud Boys now infused into law enforcement, and there's plenty of that. But people who actually study this, people who actually lead where there is effectiveness, would tell you that there's a reason sanctuary cities exist, for example. It's not to just coddle the undocumented or to protect them from being deported. It's a realization, as we're seeing economically, that our economy relies on immigrant labor, documented and undocumented, and that if there's supposed to be, as we were promised, this focus on violent criminal undocumented immigrants, then you need the help of the non-violent, non-criminal immigrant population, documented and undocumented, to seek out the violent criminal so that you can deport the violent criminal. That is what makes America safer and keeps us economically prosperous, too. Justin Walfers is a professor of economics at Michigan University's Ford School and a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute. He spoke on the impact that immigrants have on our economy.
Before Election Day, but now they're facing the consequences of their policy choices. They're saying it loud and clear. Fewer immigrants means fewer jobs.
Yep.
This is what economists call a whoops. That's the technical term. I'll admit I call it something a little more direct that I'm not going to repeat here. And if fewer immigrants means fewer jobs are created, then immigrants were never just taking jobs. They were part of the reason those jobs existed. And there it is, mate. They've said the quiet part out loud. They've wandered briefly and accidentally into Economics 101. Welcome to class, gents. It's better late than never.
So, yeah, I mean, there are plenty of folks who work in law enforcement and understand that sanctuary cities exist because, our economy obviously relies on immigrant labor, legal and illegal. We don't see ICE zip tying HR hiring people, right? We don't see ICE zip tying the meatpacking hiring manager or the people that run the farm, we don't see that, but we know that there is the existence of that. We know that because the president really wanted to sort of do a little carve out, a little set aside to create a special program for those businesses that had been hiring illegally to get away with them hiring illegally for decades and making it so that there's a legal process for them to continue taking advantage of cheap immigrant labor while getting off scot-free. Amnesty, if you will. An amnesty for the actual illegals in this case, the illegal employers. So I feel like there needs to be a little bit, some sense of understanding for us on the left. The rock and a hard place that law enforcement is in. And maybe not just walk. Listen, if a sheriff or a police chief comes to a No King's Day event to speak, you don't think that individual doesn't know the audience? They're not going there to take their tar and feathering. They're there to have dialogue. And I think we need to be receptive towards having that dialogue instead of just walking off. Because we already have that rap. We already have that cudgel, that weapon that the right use. Oh, they're anti-law enforcement. They're pro-criminal. No, we're neither. We're common sense is what we are. We see the data. We see the statistics. We understand how law enforcement works. You ask a marginalized American if they hate cops in their neighborhood? No. They actually welcome the presence so long as the presence isn't being disproportionately unfair. I mean, we need allies in law enforcement as well, right? And I don't know the sheriff in Bibb County, but I would harbor to guess that if he was there to speak at a No Kings event, he likely agrees with the overall premise of the event because he wanted to speak to those who were there. And I just don't think shouting him down or walking away while he's speaking is really effective for the movement, but that's just my opinion. It's The Ron Show on Georgia Now, Progressive Voice via TuneIn, wherever you podcast. I want to thank my guest from earlier in the show. If you missed it, you can catch it wherever you podcast on the Georgia Now app, heregeorgianow.com. April Ajoy went from CPAC attendee, where she attended Liberty University, her and her boyfriend, now they're married, went to CPAC in 2014 and went from being indoctrinated conservative Christian nationalist who looked up to the likes of Franklin Graham to now being a queer affirming progressive. It's quite a story. Again, if you missed that conversation, we'll have it via podcast. You can also hear this show weekdays, the replay at 4 p.m. on Georgia Now, 11 p.m. Progressive Voice via TuneIn, and of course, afterwards where we podcast. Y'all, they've lost Joe Rogan. I mean, the Trump administration has completely lost. Remember how important Joe Rogan was, we thought, to the outcome of the 2024 presidential election? I believe if we got to do a do-over on Election Day, I firmly believe Joe Rogan would vote for Kamala Harris now, having not had her on the show even. He would vote for Kamala Harris. Listen to this.
So, Dave, you were telling me right before the show that you are now retiring because you got an impromptu phone call and bet hundreds of millions of dollars on oil prices going down. Congratulations.
It was a good bet. It just wasn't timed right.
I thought you got it in on time. I thought you got it in like, yeah. I thought you got it in like 5 minutes early.
I did not.
How is there not a massive investigation into that right away? Didn't someone make like $1.8 billion in like 5 minutes?
Yeah, there's a lot of those, like trades like that should be investigated that kind of never are.
Bro. How about, what's his name, Lutnick? Yeah, how about that one?
He's
the tariffs one?
Working for the administration and also standing to gain huge if people can sue over the tariffs, right?
What does he do?
He's he's the commerce secretary. He was always like a money finance guy. I think he used to work for CNBC, if I'm correct.
In this administration, the wolves are taking over the hen house.
Yeah, they sure have. This is what draining the swamp looks like.
There is now the Trump administration, what is it, the fraud committee with J.D. Vance presiding over that fraud committee. Trump pardoned 77 people just last week that stole from Medicare. Did y'all know that? Donald Trump pardoned 77 people that stole from Medicare. Yeah, I mean, that just kind of completely flew under the radar. When you look at the pardons and the dollar amounts that come with the pardons, the debts canceled by pardons come to more than 1.3 billion with a B dollars. They, by the way, include the likes of Todd and Julie Chrisley. You remember those from Chrisley Knows Best? $21 million, nearly $22 million on their part alone. Todd, by the way, spoke at CPAC. I bet Grindr was off the chain at CPAC this week. I, firmly believe that we are on the precipice of what will be something of a sea change midterm in 2026. If, of course, all things get to hold as far as redistricting. I mean, it's getting a little late in the game for that. I have to think that most of that rush to gerrymandering has sort of played itself out. Here we are approaching the month of April, and between that and any court battles that might come from that, it's just getting a little too late in the game in my mind for that sort of thing. So here's to hoping, right? But we do, by the way, have some action here in Georgia that is of concern. We talked last week with Marilyn Marks from the Coalition for Good Governance about HB 960. HB 960, by the way, passed the Senate, now back in the House's hands. It'll be interesting to see what the House does with this bill. The attention, by the way, so much of the media attention having more to do with the hand-marked paper ballots and less on the onerous burden of multiple recounts for state and federal offices. We talked again with Marilyn Marks about that last week, and mostly unfunded. There were no scores done to test what it was going to cost or what local officials were going to have to do and how this is going to meet deadlines. Remember, deadlines were so important to MAGA. Finding out same night what we were going to get, what the results were, and yet we're not going to get results in a timely manner if there are mandated hand recounts, minimum 3 times of hand recounts, 1 machine recount at the precinct level if that bill were to pass. Remember now, we're making all of these changes to local, state, federal election laws, or trying to anyway, over the results of one man running for re-election in 2020 who didn't like the outcome in swing states, coming out of a pandemic, having quadrupled the national debt, and he thought things were going well. Caleb Groves, Greg Bluestein, writing in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Senate's pushing to require hand-marked paper ballots by the midterms, racing to meet a self-imposed deadline while setting up a clash with House lawmakers who want to delay the switch. Senate Republicans doubled down on their plan Friday in the final days of the legislative session. By the way, session ends Thursday, sparking confusion as competing elections proposals advanced during the frenetic closing days of the 40-day session. All we're asking is for Georgians to vote the way the vast majority of people in America vote, said Republican State Senator Greg Dolezal, Republican from Cumming, the bill's primary sponsor. By the way, that bill is a zombie bill. It's HB 960, which means it's a House bill. He's a senator. He doesn't draft House bills. The House bill was more about seating a Gwinnett judge by a representative in Gwinnett County. Greg gutted that, took the guts out, and put something else in it altogether. The mandated recounts, the hand-marked paper ballots. I happen to think the hand-marked paper ballot thing is a pretty easy fix, like the equipment that the state possesses and those in the precincts have to count. Those scanners all work for that. That could possibly potentially be done. Anybody who's ordered printing supplies knows that you can turn around, something of that substantial size, millions of ballots, I guess. I think you could do that. But the multiple recounts, the multiple hand recounts, there's just no mechanism for that. There's no staffing for that. Anyway, the standoff over the bill, Bluestein and Caleb Groves Wright, which passed 32-21, has put lawmakers and elections officials in a bind as they grapple with how to meet a mandate they set 2 years ago to eliminate QR codes from ballots by July. The debate traces to the aftermath of President Donald Trump's narrow loss in 2020 when conservative activists began pushing to scrap Georgia's touchscreen voting system manufactured by Dominion Voting Systems, which is now owned by a Trump-aligned CEO. The system produces a ballot with a QR code that is then counted by a machine. Critics, many of whom are MAGA loyalists, mistrust the QR codes because they're not readable by humans, leaving them uncertain about whether their ballots will be accurately tallied. They also cite potential vulnerabilities in the system, noting lawmakers have yet to fund a recommended security patch, leaving the state vulnerable to tampering or hacking that could alter election results. They're actually not wrong. I mean, we had a county election breach by MAGA loyalists in the aftermath of 2020. Back to the AJC piece. Democrats note election officials say such flaws cannot be exploited in real-world conditions. State Senator Rashawn Kemp of Atlanta said the bill was designed to placate, quote, conspiracy theorists. He's not wrong, but you can placate the conspiracy theorists with the hand-marked paper ballots and not have to do all of the onerous recounts mandated. I mean, obviously, a recount should be triggered when an election is close. Back to the piece. The bill is on a collision course with a House-backed bill that would keep Georgia's voting touchscreens for the midterms and call for a switch by 2028. Okay, you could potentially do that. That would allow whoever succeeds Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, who's running for governor, to refine the policy. House Speaker John Burns says, we'll push the deadline, but then let the next Secretary of State kind of help hash out the details. And they finally get to this in the piece. The measure that cleared the Senate on Friday calls for pre-printed hand-marked paper ballots, scanned by machines as the primary method of voting touchscreen, blah, 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 blah. But they finally get, way down to this in the article. Would also empower the Republican-controlled state election board to impose up to $100 fines against counties for each ineligible voter not removed from its voter rolls. That's an undue burden on the local elections office, by the way. And would mandate full hand recounts after certification for major federal and state races. Under current law, candidates can request recounts if the margin is within half a percentage point. The Senate proposed would expand the threshold to 1%. With the House advancing a competing plan and the session set to end Thursday, the two chambers are either headed toward a last-minute compromise or a stalemate that could force courts to intervene. Yay. Just what we need. More court intervention. Anyway, I want to thank April Ajoy for joining me. We'll, again, have that via podcast. You can listen to these shows replay at 4 p.m. on Georgia Now, 11 p.m. Progressive Voice via TuneIn, and, of course, wherever you podcast. Show notes, as always, at RonShowATL.com. Have yourselves a great day. We'll see you tomorrow.